Yesterday, we talked about a scientific revolution. We said that according to our timeline, Renaissance came first, then Reformation, then the scientific revolution or the Enlightenment. The first part of the Enlightenment was the scientific revolution, where people started thinking to question not only the church beliefs, but also to question the theories that or the scientific results that were reached by the Romans and the Greeks. The first one to do so was Copernicus with the discovery of the heliocentric theory, stating that Earth is not the center of the Earth. He did not publish it because he was scared to go against the church. Galileo did so, but when he did, he was forced to change his opinion. We said that the scientific revolution was based on one concept, which is the scientific method, and that the scientific method were a series of steps that the observer followed to state whether his hypothesis is correct or not. To start with today's part, after they discovered certain instruments and tools, the scientific revolution started spreading all around Europe. Okay, thus leading that everyone, starting from the scholars to the philosophers, sociologists, everyone started questioning the, the environment. They started questioning economics. They started questioning the government. They started questioning religion, of course, and they even started questioning the education. Should men only be educated, or can everyone get the freedom of education? Now, we keep saying enlightenment, enlightenment. What does it mean? It was a period of new intellectual philosophies that stressed on reason. The main concept of enlightenment was reason. You cannot just state things or rules without any proof. So it's stressed on reason, thought, and the power of individuals to solve problems. It did not accept beliefs and objectives. It had to be stated with evidences. So there is no longer take this is right, this is wrong, follow the rules. No, but instead, the Enlightenment stressed on reasoning, thinking, and evidence. What's the proof for what you're saying? It's also known as the age of reason. Remember when we talked about why is the scientific revolution important? What is the importance of the Enlightenment? It changed the way people viewed the society and would lead to several political revolutions. The Enlightenment was a sort of an awakening for the people. They first discovered that the religion was biased, or it wasn't correct, or wasn't as the church said. Then they discovered that some of the basics of the universe, like the geocentric theory, was not even correct. So people started viewing the way they live, and they started viewing the world in a different point of view. They started questioning everything, and they started being more aware of their surroundings. This would lead to several political revolutions. People questioned the church. They questioned science. The only point that's left to question is the government. This is why, after the Enlightenment, the time frame or the period of revolutions is going to start. Now, the old school, which was before the Enlightenment, according to them, that the monarch's rule is justified by divine right. What a monarch said is correct. What a king or queen says should be followed without any questioning. This was old school. The new school that came after the Enlightenment or during the Enlightenment stated that the government's power comes from the consent of the governed, which means the people. So instead of being ruled by one person, and his words are what we follow. No, we should have a government. This government should come from the people, from the common people, and the common people should agree or decide who to rule them. So, do you understand the old versus the new school?
Yes.
Is it clear? Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, Hobbes was an old writer who went with the idea of absolute power, that the country should be ruled by one person. This person should have all the absolute power in his hands, because the more power you have divided, the weaker the country will be. John Locke was another writer opposing the idea of absolute power. He favored the idea of natural rights, that people or living individuals, they have the right of life, liberty, and property. They have the right to live freely, they have the right to own property, and they have the right to pick who to judge them and to pick their freedom in terms of power and government. We already discussed this. Now, why was Hobbes' idea important? His idea of the government was absolute monarchy. We said that the ruler has absolute total control and power in order to avoid any revolutions, in order to avoid any turmoils or any conflicts with anyone. When a person has one power, he has the lead and everyone should follow. And Thomas Hobbes believed in this. Now, John Locke agreed that yes, people should be governed, there should be rules, but there should be a certain limit of freedom. Hobbes also stated that if the government that was designed to protect the people failed to do the target, the people should overthrow the government and elect a new one, which is the right to change. Now, another philosopher, Voltaire, he's a French philosopher, he fought for tolerance, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. These are a series of philosophers that we're talking about who did not question religion, they did not question the church, they did not question science, but they questioned the idea of thinking itself. They questioned more intangible ideas, things like freedom, things like property, things like government. They questioned bigger thoughts. These philosophers, when their words reached the public, led later on to the revolution. So the first one was Thomas Hobbes. He had no discussion. His idea was absolute monarchy. The second one was John Locke, the idea of natural rights and that the government should be elected by the people. And if the government failed, the citizens are free to overthrow the government and elect another government. The third philosopher was Voltaire. He fought for extra freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and he fought for tolerance and reason. People should tolerate each other. They should tolerate the government, wait till they see what they will do. And at the same time, they should have reason why they dislike or like things. He had a very famous quote, which is, I do not agree with a word you say, but will defend to the death your right to say it, which means that this goes under tolerance. You and I, we disagree on a certain topic. I do not agree with any word that you say. We are on different terms, we are on different sides. But I will defend to death your right to say it. But you are free to say your opinion. I'm free to say my opinion. Everyone is free to do whatever we want. We do not have to follow each other's words. Do you understand Voltaire's quote? Grade 12.
Yes, yes,
So if I ask you to re-explain it, will you be able to?
yes,
Other than the same person who's answering me, the rest of grade 12, the rest 19.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, miss, we can explain
Yes.
it, yeah.
Yes.
Now,
Yes, yeah, miss.
the fourth philosopher was Montesquieu. He had the idea of separation of powers, which means that I don't need one full government, I don't need one ruler, but powers should be divided. I should have a section of the government responsible for finance. I should have a section of the government responsible for the military, for example. I should have a section of the government responsible for economy. He agreed that every part of the country should be ruled by different people. Separation of powers. Okay? He also supported the idea of checks and balances, which is each branch should have a power check on the other branch to limit their power. The economical part should also, from now and then, supervise the health department, for example. There always should be a supervisor from another branch to overlook what's going on. So the separation of powers and the checks and balances, according to Montesquieu, was to limit absolute monarchy, was to limit absolute power in terms of one person or one group. Do you understand? All the philosophers go for the
Yes.
idea that power should be divided. Power should not be in the hand of one person or one group so that we can avoid dictatorships. Clear? Do you have any questions concerning the philosophers? Now,
No.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he argued for human freedom, just like the rest of the philosophers, but instead he wanted to promote or to start a society where all people are equal. He did not want the hierarchy of the elites and the commoners. He said that man is born free and everywhere he's in chains. If you go to a certain governmental office, you're treated according to your status, according to your race, according to your religion, according to which family do you come from. So he wanted to promote a society where all people were equal and you're not judged according to your race, nationality, sex, family, or even financial status. Clear?
Yes.
Now, even though all of the philosophers, the previous philosophers, were arguing for freedom and equality and no absolute monarchy and separation of powers, none of them mentioned women. None of them mentioned that women get the right to, for example, get educated, women get the right to work, women get any rights at all. All of their talks were about men, and by men they meant actual male, not citizens. Until Mary Wollstonecraft showed up and she stated that, or she called that, all of the previous rights that the other philosophers were calling for, she argued that women, just like the men, should receive education as well as the freedom of
هو مسكها حبة صغيرة.
Vicky, mute please.
المايك يا جدعان.
Okay. Guys, can you all mute your mics? Okay. So, up until Wollstonecraft showed up, no one mentioned women in their speeches. All the rights belonged only to men. When she started talking, she asked or she argued that women should receive the same rights. And the first right she argued for was the right of education. Do you all understand? Is there anything that
Yes.
you need to ask about? Any
No.
questions so far?
No.
Okay. Now, there was a place known as a salon. It's not the hair salon, but this was the place where the philosophers, the scientists, and the other intellectual groups of people gathered to meet and to discuss ideas. Okay? When they started combining their ideas and when they started putting all their ideas and researches and discoveries concerning whether it's science or philosophy or biology or literature, they created what's known as an encyclopedia, which is a very big book that contains different information about various subjects. Okay? At first, as usual, the encyclopedia was banned by the church. Why do you think the church banned the encyclopedia?
Because it would promote ideas opposing the church.
No, it will promote ideas. But what about the church? يعني, promote ideas of what? Not necessarily the church.
Uh, this will make people knowledgeable and they feared they've become knowledgeable and intellectual, so they'll start questioning the actions of church.
Exactly. Now, who had, we said that people started questioning. Actually, philosophers and scientists, they started questioning and they started observing and experimenting. Who had the proofs? The the people or the scientists?
Scientist.
Scientists. Did the common people have any information about what's going on? Yes, they heard that there is, for example, someone discussing or someone saying that the earth is not the center of the earth. Do they have any detailed information about it?
No.
Exactly. What happens when there's a whole full book about any topic you can think of, stating the hypotheses, stating that what was wrong and now what is correct, and stating the proof? What happens?
People will start questioning it and form opinions.
Yes, people, they have backup now. They have the proofs. It's written. So they can argue with the government, with the church, with anyone based on a certain proof. Clear? So it is something that is published for the common people. Before the encyclopedia, only the philosophers and the scientists, they had the proofs. Common people did not know anything. They only heard. Clear?
Clear.
Okay. Do you have any questions?
No.
No.
No, no. No.
Okay. Now, the monarchs, just give me a second. Would you please mute the mics if you're not talking or if you're not answering a question? The monarchs who embraced enlightenment or they agreed on the idea of the enlightenment. First, the first one was Catherine the Great of Russia. She tried to introduce the idea of enlightenment, but because she was a woman, she met resistance from the nobles who lived in Russia. The nobles, the elites, they did not like the idea of the Enlightenment. Why? Because most of the philosophers called for division of power. They called for equality. They called for separation of powers. So the people in charge, the people, the elites, the people with a lot of money, a lot of power will get the disadvantages. so they did not like it. So they started resisting the idea of the Enlightenment. She tried to create a law code that promoted equality. She tried to reform, but unfortunately, the country wasn't strong enough, and the percentages of the nobles and elite people at that time was more. So her embracement of enlightenment failed. Clear? So she tried to introduce the idea of enlightenment, freedom of speech, freedom of rights for women, equality between people regardless of the money, wealth, status, race, but they did not like it. The second case is Frederick the Great of Prussia. He supported religious freedom. He introduced the idea of the freedom of religion from the Enlightenment. He improved education. He reformed the justice system, which is the courts and the laws. He did not end serfdom. The system of
بس
serfs.
ممكن حضرتك تدخلي كريم؟
Okay, give me a second. Serfdom, or the system of serfs, was a system back then which was kind of close to slaves, but the difference is that the serfs, they were peasants, they were farmers who remained living in the land with the landowner. They worked as housekeeping, they worked as maids, they worked as drivers, they worked as any sort of help, okay? And they got paid, whether it's by food, whether it's by a place to live, whether it's by money, but they cannot leave. They cannot leave the family. They cannot leave the place. They cannot leave the land. So they were not really called slaves, and they were treated properly. They were allowed to accompany the family anywhere they go. So they were not mistreated, but at the same time, they were not free to leave. If the serf got married, he would get his wife, and if he had kids, they would all live with the same family. Of course, not in the same house. They would have a small room in the basement or an exterior place in the land or in the farm. Clear? So he did support religious freedom. He did improve education and the justice system, but he did not support the idea of equality between people. Unlike Catherine the Great, she called for equality in between people, nobles and commoners, equality for women, and laws, but she failed. Clear? Frederick the Great and Catherine the Great, is it clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you have any questions concerning both monarchs?
No.
Okay. This is me summarizing the whole chapter of the Enlightenment. So I took only the important parts from the lesson. So as you can see today, we covered section 2, section 3, okay? Now, and we're going to take part of section 4, or introduce section 4, not take it. Now, the last part of section 3 is the emerging of an idea called the new classical idea. Do you remember what are classics?
Yes.
They were any idea that is related to the old heritage of Greek and Rome. Now, neo in Latin means new. So when people started changing and altering the classical ideas, they started calling it the new classical. So the new classical was the first form of it, was the form of art. It combined the styles of the Greece and Rome, so Greek and Roman art. It stressed on simplicity and order, but at the same time, it the art talked about new ideas. It no longer talked about the Roman gods or the divine person, but instead you would see arts that talked about, for example, people lecturing, or books, or space, or science. So they used the same rules of the Greek and Roman art, which is the classical art, but they started drawing and targeting new concepts. This is why they called it the new classical. Is it clear?
Yes.
Now, when we go to classical music, they also used the same rules from the Greek and Roman music, but they took more lighter tones of it. So, to skip details, you need to know that classical art and music is art and music that is related to the Greek and Roman heritage. New classical art and music was the same art and music with the same rules of the Greeks and the Romans, but they targeted new audience and they talked about new topics. Clear? Do you have any questions concerning this part?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Now, we said that people started in Renaissance questioning the ideas, and then Reformation, they started questioning the church. Scientific revolution, they started questioning science. And in Enlightenment, they started questioning the idea of equality, freedom, life, liberty, and property. And we said that later on, this will lead to revolutions. The first revolution to start was the American Revolution. The Enlightenment ideas helped the American Revolution to start. Why? Because the colonists, if you remember, the colonists were only European people who traveled from Europe escaping persecution due to religion or due to status or level. So when they heard about the Enlightenment spreading in Europe and that people back in Europe now, they started to have equal rights regarding of the families, they started to have equal education regarding of the gender, they decided that we need to take a stand. This is where we're stopping for today. Okay. Next time we will start with section 4. We already took the American Revolution back in grade 10, but this is a whole very little summarized points about it. So do you have any questions concerning today's lesson or today's part, which is sections 2 and 3 about the Enlightenment?
Not for me.
The rest, do you have any questions?
No.
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 Okay, did you guys draw the timeline?
I couldn't find the PowerPoint on SMS.
There was no PowerPoint. You mean this? No, it was uploaded.